a twist of the wrist, and a deadly truth poured out. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host. Join the puzzle, drop a comment with where you're watching from. Your voices fuel this community. At Nero Wolfe's brownstone on West 35th Street. Some things are as sure as sunrise. Fritz's knock at 7 past noon with lunch. The groan of Wolfe's chair as he extols the merits of Savoy cabbage. And me, Archie Goodwin, scribbling notes, fielding calls, or catching a scowl for grabbing the wrong beer. What you don't expect is a woman barging in, uninvited, wielding a pepper grinder like it's a guillotine blade, asking for a sliver of Wolfe's time. She slipped in during that soft pause after breakfast, before Wolfe's holy orchid session, leaving me as the lone gatekeeper. I'd barely set my coffee down when the doorbell buzzed, and she was already gliding through the vestibule before I could open my mouth. Sorry, I said, but you just smashed 4 of Mr. Wolfe's rules. No guests before 9, no women, without appointments, and you're inches from trampling orchid time and kitchen law. She didn't waver. Tall, late 30s, with sharp cheekbones evoking French noir and quiet heartbreak. Black wool coat, a gold moth brooch glinting, gloves still on one too many for my liking. She glanced at the grinder in her grip. I'm not here for a consultation, she said. I need him to see this. A pepper grinder? I quipped. Unless it's stuffed with uranium or a deed to a castle, it can wait. Her gaze met mine, steady. It was in my father's study when he died. No will, just this, wrapped in wax paper. Peppercorns inside, but under the cap. She stopped, holding it out like a sacred relic or a loaded gun. I've seen plenty of theatrics. A widow once hauled in a parrot, claiming it overheard a will rewrite, but this was different. Taut, unsettling, like she carried a secret she loathed. Something's in there? I took it, cautious. It was solid, European, no junk. I twisted the cap, tilted it, and a vellum roll slid into my hand. Not just paper embossed with the seal of Feldman and Resnick, a boutique firm tangled in fraud whispers. Folded once, no blood, no frills, just one line in fine black ink. Elias knew, and that's why he died. I looked up. Elias? Feldman? My father, she confirmed. I'm Cordelia Feldman. I want to know who wrote this and why. Wouldn't. Find it you want Wolfe to deduce all that from a pepper grinder, a cryptic line, and a half-hour's disruption of his routine. I gave her the look that usually means you better have a checkbook or a compelling backstory. She just looked past me up the hall toward the office. I thought he might care. She said since someone was in your kitchen last night, your cook's spice drawer was rearranged. I blinked. How the hell do you know? Thatch turned toward the door. Already walking, ask Fritz, and tell Mr. Wolfe the pepper grinder wasn't the only thing left behind. She exited like a closing act. Quiet final, no curtain call. I stood there, for a second staring at the grinder in my hand. The note burned a hole in my imagination, and I didn't like how it felt. Fritz found me in the hallway, 5 minutes later, looking grim and slightly flushed, which was rare. I held up the grinder like it was exhibit. Ash right, isn't she? I asked. He nodded. The turmeric was missing, and Semyon added cayenne to the sea salt. Tinai let out a low whistle. Someone tampered with spice rack, and she shows up with a death note in a kitchen tool. That's a hell of a miss on place. I walked into Theophis, set the grinder on Wolfe's desk, and waited. Wolfe didn't speak for a long moment. He looked at the grinder, then at me. Then he sighed. Bring her back, he said. And Archie, tell Fritz to inventory every jar in the kitchen. Already done. I said, you taking the case? He closed his eyes. No, not yet, but you're interested. He opened one. I like a crocodile testing the warmth off water. It offends me, he said simply. Peppa does not belong with cayenne. It takes a lot to rattle the brownstone. We've had gangsters, senators, grieving gays, and once a man with a beard full of bees. Don't ask, but none of them had Thegol to mess with the kitchen. That sacred ground Wolf doesn't just value it, he worships it. Fritz, being both priest and practitioner of the culinary arts, keeps it like a Swiss vault, so the idea that someone snuck and pawed at his spices like they were poker chips and left a note in a pepper grinder, that's not just intrusion, it's heresy. Cordelia Feldman returned at precisely 2:15 p.m. Escorted into the office with all the ceremony of someone delivering a bomb. She was calmer this time, maybe because she knew she'd cracked the shell. Wolf didn't look up from his desk when she entered, just gave a small grunt. That means sit, and another. That meant talk. She did. Both. My father died 2 weeks ago. She began coronary thrombosis, the report said. He collapsed at his S18. Katona, no sign of struggle, no drugs, no motive, clean death. And yet Wolf murmured, you found a message inside a grinder. Not just any grinder, she said. That grinder sat on his desk for 20 years. He used it more than his MLANC. Why would he hide a message inside it? I asked. She looked at me, because it was the one thing he knew no one would touche. Kept it for ritual. He'd grind pepper onto his evening scotch. Said it helped. Beth knows. She gave a short, humorous smile only. Elias would garnish 12-year Macallan with teary. Wolf's brow twitched. I took over. You said no. Well, what about theirs? Only me. My mother passed 6 years ago. I inherited everything. Everything sounded like it wore tailored suits and walked with a private banker. But you suspect something, Wolf said, now focusing on her fully. This Elias knew. It implies conspiracy. Secretary Cordelia hesitated. Her eyes dropped to the corner of Wolf's desk, where the grinder sat like a puzzle box. My father had partners, 5 of them technically. Feldman and Resnick was his creation. It's privately held, an elite client base. My father had a reputation for precision. Once froze a portfolio over a spelling error. Then he found something Wolf said and left this. She nodded. I think someone knew he was suspicious. Maybe he confronted them. Maybe he didn't, but he didn't want me to ignore it. Wolf leaned back, folded his hands. Name them. She paused. You want the partner's name of them? He repeated. She reached into her purse and handed me a sheet of creamy, expensive stationery. 5 names written in fountain pen. Dorian Resnick, co-founder CAFOA. Vivian Malloy, in-house counsel. Greg Tapper, director of strategy. Shaw Belden, international accounts. Rafi Sandler, client. Liaison, family friend. They all attended the funeral. Cordelia said they all pretended I didn't just inherit a kingdom. Dorian kissed me on the cheek like he wasn't already. Back at his desk, rearranging the boardroom. And which of them would be most upset if Elias knew something? She smiled faintly. All of them. There was a beat of silence. Wolf's eyes closed. I knew what that meant. He was already arranging mental chess pieces, categorizing motives, testing theories against human nature, like a botanist testing soil. Then he said, Mr. Goodwin will visit Feldman and Resnick tomorrow. That was my cue. Any particular questions I should ask? Yes. Find out which of them liked cayenne. Cordelia blinked. I don't follow. You don't need to. Wolf said. Idosha rose, hesitant. You'll look into it? He waved a hand. I already am. As she left, I turned to Wolf. What do you think? I think Samin wanted to see if we'd notice. He said, notice what? That we'd been to Chev. Next morning I dressed with the kind of care you reserve for fancy funerals. In cold interviews my suit was the shade of navy. That makes accountants nervous, and my tie was conservative enough to avoid offending anyone on the corporate food chain. Wolf had handed a list of 5 names with only one instruction: shake the tree record. Who winces? Feldman and Resnick occupied the 2-2 floor of a sleek glass building in Midtown that tried very hard not to look like had handled billions The lobby had tasteful stone walls, abstract art, and the kind of lighting that makes everyone look half a shade richer. I gave my name at the desk and was escorted by a young man who moved like he didn't plan on working here. Long, probably still hoping to make partner. Before 40, the receptionist, a blonde named Kim, who smiled like she was rationing calories, announced me to a tall woman in a gray dress who came gliding out of the main corridor. Her handshake was firm, but her eyes were already calculating. Vivian Nallo, she say General. Counsel, you're with Miss Feldman, Archie Goodwin. I said Miss Feldman's represent. Yes, I'm conducting informal follow-ups on her late father's estate. Ah, her smile thinned still. No, will not, unless it's hiding in the salt shaker. That earned a flicker in her gaze, small, but they're like someone noting the presence of a knife at a tea party. She walked me to a glass-walled conference room and offered coffee. I declined and waited 10 minutes later. They came in one by one, summoned either by her or sheer curiosity. The 5 partners in a firm, built on quiet money and cleaner hands. Dorian Resnicum first, mid-50s, lean, gray at the temples. He had the walk of a man who once been underestimated and made a hobby of ensuring it never happened again. We're still mourning Elias, Hesed, folding his hands over the back of a chair. But we're also practical people. Firm must go on, must it? I asked. He didn't answer, just gave me a knowing smile. For you're here for something. What is it? I'm looking for context. A message was found implied. Elias may have discovered something untoward. Resnick's mouth tightened slightly. He was a meticulous man, brilliant, difficult. If he found something worth hiding, it was either profoundly damaging or profoundly trivial. It was either evasion or philosophy, maybe both. Greg Tupper was next, younger than I expected, mid-30s, with the slick charm of someone who could sell off your pension and make you feel grateful. Strategy guy, you could smell the spreadsheets. I didn't know Elias. Well, he said, leaning back in the chair, like he was auditioning for a finance documentary. He was from a different era, believed in gold, watches and verbal contracts. I believe in data. KP is we didn't always align, but y'all worked together on paper. Sure, in practice, he let me be the future. And now that future belongs to his daughter. He smiled. Cordelia is smart. She won't interfere. She knows her limits. If he was trying to sound reassuring, he missed by a country mile. Shaw Belden arrived in shirt sleeves, chewing on a piece of licorice and looking like he just stepped off a plane from Geneva. His file said international accounts. His mouth said casual contempt. Let me guess, he said, dropping into the chair. Across from Mesh's paranoid, now thinks Daddy left her a secret breadcrumb trail. Did he? I hope not. He kept most of the firm's skeletons under lock and key. He was private, event paranoid. Himself, was he afraid of someone? Belden laughed. He was afraid of everything. Global instability, trade tariffs, citrus blight. It's why he was good. Did he have enemies in finance? He smiled sharp and sharky. Only the people he didn't beat. That didn't narrow it down. Raffy Sandler was the odd duck, older with thick glasses and a grandfatherly air. He wore a bow tie and looked like Hesselby lecturing at Columbia, not navigating hedge funds. Cordelia's file-said family friend, which in these circles could mean anything from Godfather to professional baby. He sat down, slowly glanced at the others, then back at Elias. Was complicated, he said. Quiet lie, was searching for something near the end. I think he sensed the edifice cracking, or maybe just his own time running out. Cracking. How? Raffy shook his head on. Not sure, but something was bothering him. And you didn't ask, I did, he said softly. Once Hesed, if I put it in writing, someone will bury it. But if I don't, I'll bury myself. No, that was interesting. The last to arrive was Vivian, who hadn't really left, but now took a formal seat at the tables, crossed one leg over the other, and steepled her fingers. I assume you've heard what you came to hear, she said. I've heard pieces. I said. Whether they fit the puzzle, we'll see. She narrowed her eyes. If you're suggesting we're hiding something, I'm not suggesting anything, I said. But Somione rearranged Mr. Wolfe's kitchen spice drawer last night, and whoever did it knew about the pepper grinder. That hit, not a big hit, but it was like someone had just whispered fire in a movie theater. Everyone stayed in their seat, but all the air changed Dorian waste. First to recover, it's a very unusual metaphor. It's not a metaphor, it's trespass. Raffi looked genuinely disturbed. You mean someone broke in? Nuthy walked in. Vivian's voice was tight. Is this going to become a police matter? Not unless it needs to be, I said. But if I were you, I'd consider who among you knew Elias well enough to hide a message inside something as domestic as a pepper grinder, and knew where to find Wolfe's kitchen. Silence, a thick, meaningful, and after a moment, Tupper leaned forward. If there's anything we can do to cooperate, let us know. I stood. You already are back at the brownstone. I debriefed. Wolfe over beer and Fritz's roasted duck. He listened with his eyes closed and fingers steepled. You said Vivian flinched, he murmured. She masked it. But yeah, spice reference made her blink, and Raffi, worried genuinely, might be thinly one with a conscience. And Mr. Tupper, smooth as oiled silk and twice assured to grip Wolfe's side. So a dead man with a message. 5 associates unevelated my kitchen, and 1 left a clue in a grinder, and none of them admit talk knowing anything they don't need to. Me too, he said. Lifting his glass, they've already told me more than they intended. I waited. So what's the play? We wait. They'll move again. What? If they don't? They will, he said calmly, because now they know we're watching, and they don't know what we already know of them. Thing about people who lie for a living is they're rarely good at lying when it matters. That's where I come in the next 48 hours. We're all about movement mine. And there's Wolfe had given me the directive in his usual roundabout way. Mr. Goodwin, if they are guilty, they will seek control. If they are innocent, they will seek distance chart, a difference which translated into Englishment. Follow them, listen hard, and don't get caught with my shoes off. I started with Greg Tupper because something about the way he leaned into his own importance made me think he was either hiding something or rehearsing for a TED Talk, his schedule courtesy of a Colin Darklips I'd snatched in the conference room. Had him speaking at a private equity seminar downtown. The event was being hosted at one of those windowless corporate hotels where the wallpaper looks like regret and the carpet absorbs in. I wore a badge that said David Sperling Press Business Review and got a free sandwich and 3 strange smiles before I found Tupper at the bar during a break. He was schmoozing a finance blogger and a woman in a cobalt suit who looked like she hadn't slept since the Clinton administration. Tapa was in performance mode, all grins and metaphor stratic, synergy forward, capital friction, and other linguistic atrocities. Didn't approach, just watched, listened, waited. 10 minutes and someone asked a question about contingency planning for senior leadership. Lost the room, hushed a little. Tupper hesitated, then with the confidence of someone who hadn't been told no since puberty. He said, we've had our share of transitions, but a strong firm anticipates departures, even the final kind. The way he said it made my spine itch. He hadn't mentioned Elias's name, but his tone that forced levity and the shadow of death was the kind of thing you don't say unless you've rehearsed it. I left before he saw me. Next up was Vivian Mallow, according to the office grapevine, also known as Kim, the receptionist's Instagram. She had a standing dinner at Del Conto every Thursday with someone in publishing, likely a quiet ambition to pivot from law to literature. I got a booth near hers and listened in. She talked softly, choosing words like legal footnote, test precise, bloodless. What caught my ear wasn't what she said, was what shouldn't Cordelia's playing at a, she said once. Between bites of grilled halibut bought, should get bored. Women like that always do. Grief is an accessory. Gamanche was with murmuring something I didn't catch. She waved it off. No, she won't cause problems. Dorian has it under control, and if he doesn't, well, Elias left behind more holes than blueprints. It was enough for me. I left a generous tip for the waitress and made a note to check her background. Anyone that I see isn't born. They're reforged Friday morning. I paid a visit to Shaw Belden. His calendar had him at the airport JFK Terminal 7 on a morning flight to Zurich. I beat him there by 30 minutes and watched him check in, wearing a linen jacket, headphones, and sunglasses like a man on the run or in denial. I followed him through security purely for sport, then peeled off before. So I got wise, but the real prize came an hour later. I got a call from Sol Panza. I pulled Shaw's recent travel manifests. Hesed Zurich's not unusual. What is unusual is that his hotel of choice, Thekkenikoff, was also visited last month by a certain private investigator named Wilbert Kale, who specializes in off-book corporate vetting, the kind of guy you hire when you want to know who's opening the wrong doors. So either Belden's being followed, or he's the one doing the following. Saul grunted. Could be both. I jotted it down and moved on. Rafe Sandler was a trickier, fishier. His routine was boring. Home offices cynic repeat. But his aura was the thing the man seemed to clean, like Simeon, pretending he'd never had a thought impolite enough to say. Aloud he tailed him on a Friday afternoon walk through Riverside Park, where he stopped for coffee at a cart and dropped a few coins in a saxophone case. I approached casually, told him I was the guy asking questions for Cordelia. I know who you are, he said. Archie Goodwin, the one who carries vaults. I sounds poetic, I said, or religious. He sipped his coffee. You shouldn't dig too far into Elias's death. Some things aren't puzzles, there are warnings. You think it was natural. I think he was tired, he said softly, and the people around him were circling. Circling for what? For control. They always do when a strong man weakens. He looked out toward the Hudson. He told me odds. They think they'll inherit, but all I've left them is doubt. I let that sit and said, you know someone rearranged Wolfe's kitchen. Do you know who did it? He nodded, then shook his head. I know who would. That told me more than if he'd pointed a finger. I returned to the brownstone. That night Wolfe was in the plant room pruning a dendrobium hybrid. With the care of a heart surgeon, I gave him the full rundown verbatim, where it mattered. When I was done, he didn't move. Mr. Goodwin, he said finally, do you believe in elegance, in suits? Sure, in design, in human structure. I waited. These people, Resnick, Mallow, Tapper, Belden, they are practical creatures, function over sentiment. But Elias Feldman, he left behind something that lacked practicality, a cryptic message in Aspis. Tool. I nodded, and someone still tried to erase it. He turned slightly nutty. Didn't erase, they rearranged. That's the tell, not destruction. Reordering. That's ego, not fear. You think they wanted us to notice? Yes. He turned back to the orchid. And now that we have, they'll feel compelled to act again, because guilt will not allow stillness. It requires movement. And Cordelia, she is not their equal, not in cunning, not in ruthlessness, but she's something else. What? He clipped a withered bloom. She is honest. That surprised me. You think she didn't know? She suspected. That's different. Just then Fritz knocked and entered. His face was tight. There's a note, he said in thepentry. Wolfe's eyes closed were inside the jar of coriander. Fritz handed it to him. I opened the jar, pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. One of them is desperate. One of them is watching, but only the one who rearranges the kitchen knows what Elias truly left behind. Tell Wolfe he missed something. See. Wolfe's brows rose. See, Cordelia, I asked. He shook his head. No, she wouldn't leave. That here she wouldn't have access then. Who? He didn't answer, just turned back to his orchidan. Said, they're inside the game now. Mr. Goodwin, it's time we changed the board ions, saw Wolfe stare down a district attorney with nothing but a raised eyebrow and the exact pronunciation of balderdash. That same eyebrow went up again Saturday morning, and for the same reason it always does. Someone had made the mistake of believing he wouldn't notice. It started with tea. Fritz, a meticulous creature by trade and disposition, keeps the pantry like a museum exhibit labeled rotated sealed. I noticed first, when the Lapsang Such Chong smelled off, it was replaced. Head-old. Wolfe quietly, as if saying it too loud would invite more heresy, or dilute with something smoky. But cheaper, unworthy Wolfe looked up from his chair slowly like a boulder, preparing to fall on a temple. Do you mean to tell me? He said that a guest or intruder has adulterated my tea, or swapped it entirely. Fritz said, lips thin. I was at me desk, and I didn't speak, not yet. I was waiting for the next line. The real one, it came exactly 7 seconds later. This, Wolfe said, is deliberate. And just like that, the game shifted again. I started the day checking windows and door locks, not because I believed someone had picked them, but because whoever got in had either keys, permission, or gall. The only sign of physical entry was to a faint smudge on the back door knob, like someone with gloves had hesitated or enjoyed themselves. Wolfe ordered me to call. Saul Panzer and I did. Saul arrived with his usual mild manner and carried his leather case like it contained a full forensic lab, and it pretty much did. Headested the pantry knob, the tea tins, and a 3-inch stretch of shelf where the coriander jar had stood. I didn't expect results, and neither did Wolfe. This weighs about principle. While Saul muttered over brushes and powders, I checked the kitchen again this time. I caught it. The spice rack was subtly off, not as dramatic as the first intrusion, not even rearranged, just wrong. The tarragon tin was backwards, the turmeric was there, but the label had a crease it hadn't had before. The C. Salt had been moved too infoward, like it had been used or posed. I found another note. This one was folded and tucked behind the third drawer handle on the inside edge, where only someone looking for a fork might notice. I typed again. Unfolded. Once read, you are watching the wrong hands. Ask Fritz about the rosemary. I turned slowly and looked at Fritz. He was wiping the edge of a knife. His movements too rigid. Fritz, I said, you use rosemary this week? He frowned. No, not since last Sunday, for Thellig of lamb. I nodded. Where do you keep it? In the drawer, right side. Middle row. It checked. It was there, but it wasn't. The label said rosemary, but the contents were timed, subtle enough to miss, but distinct enough that Wolfe would have noticed if he'd been the one seasoning. Someone switched this. Fritz stared at the tin like it had insulted his ancestors. No one uses these tins but me, he said. Apparently someone does. In the office, I laid out the evidence like a butler serving a course. Wolfe didn't order a message about hands and accusation. Misdirection. I handed him the rosemary tin. He sniffed it once and grunted. Time. Yeah, time disguised as rosemary. Headed his fingers together. This, he said, is not merely intrusion. It's performanceism is communicating they want us to react, and, more importantly, to suspect. Well, it is the point, Wolfe snapped. We are not meant to know, we are meant to feel, to turn inward, to lose our edge. Saul entered just then with a small flat envelope and dropped it on Wolfe's desk. Prints one partial gloved, or smudge too faint to lift. He turned to me. But you are right, there are drag marks on the shelf. Someone moved things. Purposefully, but not to steal. To signal. Fritz appeared in the doorway. He was holding something in a folded napkin. This was under the pantry shelf between the floorboards. He handed it over gently. Wolfe didn't reach for it, so I did. It was a small handwritten index card. The ink was smudged in the upper corner, like it had been written fast, or with wet hands. Elias had a ledger. He knew she wrote it down. Resnick wants it. So does Tupper. Don't trust Cordelia? There it was, a fracture in the story, a new vector of suspicion, don't trust. Cordelia, I read aloud. That's Nero Wolfe closed his eyes, not entirely. She knew more than Shelley. Or rather, she feared more than she admitted. I looked at the card again. No. You believe it? No. Wolfe said Andy's. He leaned back. It's bait. But bait reveals the trapper's mind, not just his quarry that afternoon. I called Cordelia, asked her come by. She arrived an hour later looking sharper than usual, trench coat, no gloves, confidence in check. We sat in the office, Wolfe in his chair, silent as a tomb. I handed her Thecard. She read it once, twice, her mouth tightened. Is this supposed to be from my father? No, I said. It's about him. It says he kept a ledger and that 2 people won it. It also says not to trust you. Stared at me. Do you? I trust motiviors. Is still unclear. She didn't flinch. My father was careful too. Careful if he kept a ledger. It's either encrypted, hidden, or gone. But if it exists, Shepaused, yes. I have a theory, but I'll need to go back to the house on why, because it's the only place my father kept things he didn't want found. She said was inside something already valuably glanced at. Wolfe's eyes opened, explained there's a library not for books, first edition's vault. Ensured he stored them in glass cases. He once told me if Somione breaks in, they'll steal the Hemingway before they realize. I've hollowed the KFK, Wolfe murmured. So he hid records in false editions. Maybe, she said, maybe that's where the ledger is. Wolfe raised own hand. Archie, take Saul, go with her, do not alert the firm. I stood. And if we find Ethan, Mr. Goodwin, we will invite our guests to a final supper. As I followed Cordelia out to the cab, she turned suddenly and looked me in the eye. Do you think I planted the note? I looked at her, face cool but tired. No, I said, but I think someone wants me to. The ride up to Katona was quiet, but not awkward. Cordelia didn't fill the space with unnecessary words, and I didn't ask questions she wouldn't answer. Saul Panzer rode up front with the driver, and I watched the autumn-tinted hills slide past like a slow confession. Feldman Estate sat on a modest rise, less a mansion than a statement, low, widely, tastefully gated, and designed to make you feel like money never had to apologize for itself. Cordelia keyed, using, bypassing a stone-faced groundskeeper who offered a nod, and nothing more. It was the kind of house that could hold secrets without flinching. We went straight to the library. It was just as described, polished cherrywood shelves, temperature-controlled glass cases, leather armchairs that looked like they'd never been sat in. Most of the books were first edition, signed Capizer curiosities, bound in velvet and pride. Cordelia walked directly to the far wall, second shelf from the bottom. She knelt beside a thick, oversized volume of The Trial by Franz Kafka. Black cover, notice jacket, a collector's piece. She paused with her hand on it. My father once said, this book is about guilt, but no one knows the crime. She pulled it off the shelf. Seams fitting inside the pages had been cut, hollowed, a perfect square, surgical in precision. And inside the void, a small black notebook bound in round leather and sealed with a single red thread. We didn't speak. I opened it slowly. Inside, Elias Feldman's handwriting ran dense and clipped every line of Thottender. Pressure, March 6th. Tupper pushed for authorization of off-ledger fund again. High-yield acid umbrella refused, too vague. Smells like a shell. April 14. Thresnick hinted at legacy continuity. Asked about my daughter's interests. Unsettling tone. May 22nd. Vivian arranged third audit override discrepancy. Buried in Macia's fund. June 4th. Raffi asked if I'd made peace with letting go. I hadn't said anything yet. June 29th. I told Cordelia nothing safer that way. Names, dates, doubts turned into warnings. Feldman had been building a case quietly, methodically, and documenting every fracture in the facade. Then the final entry. July 9th. Found cayenne in my coffee tin. Intentional. They're signaling now, watching reactions. One of them is baiting me. I must leave a record they cannot touch. I looked up. Cordelia's expressions didn't change, but her hand closed into a slow fisty. Had no idea. She said your father trusted his own mind more. Then he trusted you. I said gently, that's not a judgment. It's survival. Saul stepped forward, taking the notebook with a gloved hand. I'll get this copied. Quiet Lithan back in the case, so no one knows it was found good. I said because somebody else already. Suspects were close, and they've been in the brownstone twice that night back in the city. Saul and I went through the ledger with Wolfe. He listened without interruption, brow furrowed like the folds of a bad sowl. The entries painted a picture not of a single betrayal, but of layered ones. Each partner at Feldman and Resnick had reasons to act, reasons to cover, and most damning reasons to wait. What do we do with this? I asked. Send it to the authorities. Tip Cordelia Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He reached for a bottle of beer unusual for him and poured it slowly into a chilled glass. We done a thing yet? He said, this is the weight. Now we need the leverage, meaning someone must act, someone must force. The reveal, as long as this stays a secret, it remains volatile, but exposed it will detonate. Saul nodded thing. Let me apply pressure. Wolfe raised a brow discreetly always. Saul said and vanished into the night like a rumor. He worked fast by noon the next day. I had 3 voicemails, 2 emails, and 1 unmarked envelope slipped under the brownstone door. All signs that Saul had stirred Thepet quietly. Through back channels, he'd leaked word of a ledger, something damaging, precise, and possibly in Wolfe's possession. It took hours, but they blinked at 2:43 p.m. Our buzzer rang. Dorian Resnick, unannounced in an unseasonably warm trench coat and an expression somewhere between poker face and terrified. I let him in. Wolfe didn't rise. Mr. Resnick, to what do we owe these rare intrusion? Dorian smiled tightly. No need for games. Mr. Wolfe, I believe you have something that belongs to the late Mr. Feldman. I have many things, Wolfe said, and none of them are yours. Dorian adjusted his coat. I'd like to avoid unnecessary complex. You strike me as a man who values discretion. And you strike me, Wolfe said calmly, as a man who believes threat and diplomacy occupy the same breath. There was silence, then Dorian exhaled. You have the ledger. That word again, Wolfe murmured. How curious, especially since no such item has been mentioned publicly, yet you came straight here. Dorian's jaw flexed. Let them be plain. That notebook contains conjecture and supposition. If released, it could damage reputations, and innocent ones at that. And yours. He didn't answer. Wolfe nodded. Mr. Goodwin show Mr. Resnick out? I did. He didn't protest. An hour later, I received a call, blocked number, raspy voicemail. You'd know me. It said, but if you want to keep your boss breathing, stop digging. Click. I looked at Wolfe. He wasn't surprised. The final movement begins. Hesed softly. That wasn't Resnick. I said no. He agreed it was someone more desperate. Simeon, aware that the ledger is real, but unaware of how incomplete it is. Incomplete. He opened the notebook to the last page and turned it toward me, written in Feldman's hand, faint, barely legibly. Anything happens, check the grinder again. I stared. We missed something. Wolfe nodded. Someone else didn't that night. I took the pepper grinder apart, down toit springs and base plate. At first nothing. Then I tried something fetty. He held it near the stove, warming the metal slightly. Something clicked, not audible, tactile. The base turned, not the usual cap, but a second layer inside was a second note, smaller than the first, laminated, waterproofed. Raffi knows more than he will admit. Look to the Kyanethid, was it? But it was enough, because Raffi was the only one who hadn't yet flinched. Wolfe gathered the players, all of them? I asked. Yes, he said, tonight. Heclos the ledger smiled faintly. We have the proof. We have the motive. All that remains is clarity. I nodded. And the Cayenne? He chuckled a question. Of taste, Mr. Goodwin, nothing more sinister than spice until it burns. Nero Wolfe doesn't bluff. He doesn't posture, and he doesn't yell when the wolf wants something. He waits like gravity and lets the situation fall toward him. So when he instructed me to summon all 5 suspects to the brownstone for a clarification of matters concerning the late Mr. Feldman cest, I didn't ask why, I just made the calls. I was polite but firm. Mr. Wolfe will appreciate your presence this evening at 8. Cordelia Feldman will also attend. There will be no press, no polish, just conversation. That word conversation carries a certain weight when it's issued from West 35th Street. It doesn't suggest threats. It implies certainty. They all agreed, some with clip tones, others with forced casualness. None of them wanted to say no. That's what guilt sounds like when it's not ready to admit itself. By the time Autu Dis rolled around, Fritz had prepared his usual neutral offering: coffee, mineral water, no alcohol. Wolfe didn't want any. Nerves dulled. The guests arrived one by one, ushered in with the same calm greeting, each suspecting the others more than they suspected. As Vivian Mallow came first, dressed in black again, looking like she'd walked out of a corporate noir. Dorian Resnick followed, jaw-tight trench coat left in foyer. Shaw Belden strolled in last, casual as ever, cracking a joke. No one lauded Raffi. Sandler came with an apologetic smile and a bow tie. Half-cocked Greg Tupper, I noticed, wore gloves, though it wasn't cold. Cordelia arrived precisely on time. She didn't acknowledge anyone beyond a short nod and took a seat closest to Wolfe's desks. Hadn't seen the second note. Wolfe had chosen not to show her when they were all seated. Wolfe opened his eyes. Ladies, gentlemen, thanked you. Silence. The kin that presses against your lungs. You're all here because of Elias Feldman. Wolfe said, not just because he died, but because before he did, he feared what you would become without him. Resnick shifted. Vivian crossed her legs. Tupper exhaled through his nose. Wolfe continued, he kept a ledger. You all know this. Some of you suspected, one of you found out, and when you did, you sought to retrieve or destroy it. Sean Belden raised a hand like he was in court. Are we being accused of something? Because I didn't come here to play Clue with you. Came here, Wolfe said, cutting him off with the precision of a guillotine. Because you think someone else did it, and you want to know who. Shaw shut up. Wolfe turned to Resnick. You came to me first, uninvited, nervous. You were afraid I had something, and you were correct. Resnick's lip twitched. I came because I thought you'd be reasonable. No, Wolfe said, you came because you misjudged your colleagues. He turned to Vivian. You feared Cordelia would interfere. You dismissed her grief as ornamental. Vivian's lips thinned. And you, Mr. Tupper, so concerned with the firm's future, you missed the rot in the floorboards. Tupper leaned forward. This is ridiculous. Is it? Wolfe said. You lobbied for an off-ledger fund. Elias refused. Why? Because he was old-fashioned. He didn't understand digital markets. Understood fraud. Mr. Tupper. Wolfe turned to Raffi Sandler. You've said little. That's your role. The friendly face, the one who watches but never interrupts. Raffi gave a small shrug. Some people listen better than they speak. Yes, Wolfe agreed. But you spoke to Elias. He wrote that you were the only one he nearly trusted, which is why your silence is the most damning of all. A long pause. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Now we come to the Cayenne. The room collectively tensed. Someone entered my kitchen. Wolfe said twice, once to rearrange, once to mislead. They left notes, messages. They wanted me to see something, but more importantly, they wanted someone else to know. I had looked at each face. That kind of maneuver requires 2 things: confidence and proximity. His eyes landed on Raffi. You visited my house once. You used the kitchen. You were the only one with access, and the subtlety not to leave footprints. Raffi didn't move. The notes pointed to the ledger, but the second note found only because of a hidden mechanism. In the pepper grinder named you. Raffi spoke quietly. I didn't kill Elias, if that's where this is going. No, Wolfe said, but you knew who wanted him gone. You knew what they wanted proof. He'd never give up control, and I warned him. Raffi said he told him they'd act, but he didn't listen because he trusted his own mind more than anyone else. Wolfe said he buried Theliger. He even left a backup clue, but he didn't count on someone deciding hostage. The mystery before we solved it. Wolfe leaned forward. You left the no testy room, snapped toward Raffi. He nodded. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't go to the police, not without looking like a co-conspirator, so I tried to get you interested. Wolfe, the only man Eliasiever said he respected, he used to read your case clippings like scripture. Y'all wanted us to solve it. I said I wanted someone to stop it from happening again. Wolfe didn't gloat. He doesn't do that. He simply turned to the others. Mr. Tupper, Miss Mallow, Mr. Resnick, Mr. Belden. You're not murderers, but you are opportunists, and you engineered pressure. You hinted at succession. You misused funds. You looked for the ledger, and when Elias used, you waited for nature to intervene. He held up the notebook, didn't? So someone helped Resnick jump to his feet. That's slander. Number Wolfe said its motive then. He turned to Cordelia. Your father knew his legacy would be contested. He tried to outthink it. He didn't trust you with the truth. He trusted that you would seek it. Cordelia stood. She looked at all of them. Father left this firm to people who wanted his crown, but not his ethics. I'll see. Every one of you audited thoroughly. Vivian sneered. You don't have that kind of power. Cordelia smiled. You'd be surprised. Wolfe tapped the ledger. You hide the evidence. You have the name. What you choose to do with it is your affair, but make no mistake, if any of these people interfere with the course of justice, any of them, I will not stay silent. And with that he closed the book. Raffi stood slowly. I'm sorry for what I did, but I couldn't let it die with him. Cordelia nodded. You didn't. After they left, silence returned to the brownstone. Wolfe sat with his beer. Tie poured mine. You really don't like cayenne, do you? I asked. No, he said, not when it's trying to season the truth. The brownstone had never felt quieter than it did after the suspects left. Not even the ticking of the wall clock dared interrupt the silence Wolfe cultivated after a strategic engagement. He sat in his chair, a glacier of intellect, in a sea of dim lamplight, staring at nothing. I knew better than to speak until he stirred. When he finally did, 22 minutes later, it was with one short phrase. They don't know what I asked. That it's over. It wasn't over just yet. The suspects had fled like chess pieces pushed to the board's edge, but the game still needed a checkmate, one final reveal. So Wolfe called Cordelia back the next day. No conference room. No crowd, just her, Wolfe and me in the office. The air was lighter than it had been. She no longer looked weary, just tired. I'll be speaking with the board, she said. With the documents you provided, I can force a forensic audit. I've already frozen the discretionary fund. Wolfe inclined his head. That will do, but before you proceed with justice, you must first understand why. Cordelia blinked. I thought we did know. Wolfe said, you understand the facts. You don't yet understand the architecture. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned back. Go ahead, Maestro. Wolfe folded his hands and began. Elias Feldman was not killed. He died of a coronary event, one brought on, I believe, by pressure, fear, and emotional attrition. But his death was used. That is the crime, not murder, not fraud, orchestration. Cordelia frowned. Used by him. That is the final, not. Wolfe said. And one only an act of ego could have a titan. He reached for the ledger and opened to the final entries. Raffi Sandal Thau, complicit in his silence, was not the architect. He left messages, he nudged us, but he never moved to harm or control. He told me he warned my father, Cordelia said quietly. Yes, Wolfe said, but not in time, and not with enough force to prevent what followed. What followed was a maneuver, not a murder, but a professional coup carried out by someone who knew that waiting for Elias's death wouldn't guarantee succession. Someone who needed the ledger destroyed, or at the very least found and framed before it could fall into the wrong hands. He turned a page and held up the grinder. The pepper grinder was a fail-safe, a decoy, and a vault your father feared being silenced, so he chose a hiding place. No one would suspect until they did. I said, indeed. Wolfe murmured because someone else knew. His habits, someone who had spent time in his personal space, someone who could mimic his tastes. Someone closed Cordelia's brow. For a video, saying one of the five planted the cayenne. No, Wolfe said they lacked the subtlety. They dealt in power, not nuance. That someone else did. He fixed his ice in her. You? The room froze. Cordelia stared at him. Excuse me, you planted the cayenne. Wolfe said, calm and immovable. You left the notes, not Ruffy. That's... She started, then stopped. Wolfe held up a finger. You came to me with the grinder, but what you didn't expect, what you hoped waste, that I wouldn't open it immediately, that I would catalog it, set it aside, and investigate outwardly. That delay would give you time to plant messages, rearrange the kitchen, build a story around intrusion and mystery. I spoke next, and you knew the kitchen well enough to fake a disturbance that would grab Wolfe's attention without tripping the alarm. Cordelia looked between us. Her voice was cold, now controlled. So why will I do that, Mr. Wolfe? Why the charade? Because the ledger is genuine, but you didn't want it to incriminate the guilty. You wanted it to frame someone specific, someone you blame for your father's downfall. He turned a page. Vivian Mallow. Cordelia blinked. Not fast enough. Wolfe pressed. She was your father's confidant. You resented her influence. He trusted her judgment more than yours. When he died, you discovered the ledger, but found it insufficient, too vague, too circumstantial, so you embellished. You created a trail off reads and misdirection, designed to point not at the firm, but at Vivian herself. I stepped in. You planted the second note, the one warning not to trust you. It was meant to throw us off. Reverse psychology. It almost worked. Cordelia swallowed. I only wanted the truth found, she said quietly. My father was surrounded by liars, and you, Wolfe said, wanted to be the one who punished them. You wanted control, but control obtained through manipulation is no better than the betrayal you hoped to avenge. Cordelia stood slowly, not angry, just tired. You're not going to the police with this? No, Wolfe said. You've committed no crime. Not yet, but you believe I intended to. I believe, Wolfe said, that you were willing to shape the truth to suit your grief, but also believe you understand now that your father, flawed, proud, elusive, would not have wanted you to become the very thing he feared. She nodded once, turned and left without another word. When the door closed, Wolfe sighed. She'll recover, he said, but she never trust herself the same way again. He looked at the grinder on the desk. You knew all along? No, he said, but I suspected the moment the second note used my name. He looked at me, knowing it that circle would reference me directly. But Cordelia, she'd read my cases, she'd know my methods. And she assumed flattery would buy her time. I poured us both a glass of beer. So what now? Now, Wolfe said, justice proceeds, but not from us, no hesitate. The ledger will speak, the board will act, and the firm will fracture. That is punishment enough. He lifted his glass to seasoning. He said, I raised mine, and not mistaking time for rosemary, he gave me a rare smile, even in grief. Mr. Goodwin, precision matters. It was a Tuesday evening, and the world had moved on the air, and the brownstone had returned to its usual density, a comforting blend of old wood-polished leather and roasted garlic. Fritz was back to humming while he cooked, and Wolfe had resumed his monastic schedule. Urchins from 9 to 11 o'clock, lunch promptly. At 1 o'clock, reading from 4 until 6 o'clock, and no tolerance whatsoever for interruption, unless the building was on fire or Theshad Row was overcooked, which to Fritz's credit hadn't happened in 12 years. Cordelia Feldman had not returned to the brownstone. She hadn't called either, but a slim envelope had arrived 2 days earlier, bearing the letterhead of a prestigious law firm. and a short note in it. Cordelia's handwriting, "Thank you for finding the truth, even when I tried to bend it inside," was a check generous enough to keep Wolfe in beer and Montenegrin truffles. For 6 months he hadn't deposited it guilt money. He called it only currency with an expiration date. Wolfe hadn't said more about Cordelia since, but I could tell something about her still stuck under his skin, not anger, not disappointment, a kind of intellectual melancholy. He admired precision, but he went blind to human frailty. In fact, he often said, the more predictable people claim to be, the more unpredictable their choices become, which is a fancy way of saying never trust grief to behave. The official fallout began 3 days after Theophis' confrontation. The Feldman and Resnick board convened for an emergency meeting in a private downtown chamber. I wasn't there, but sources, meaning Saul Ponza's mysterious cousin, who manages client portfolios, told me the meeting started civil and ended volcanic. Vivian Mallow stepped down that night. Dorian Resnick requested a medical leave of absence. Shaw Belden canceled his Zurich flight and lawyered. Tupper denied everything and got real quiet real fast. As for Rafi Sandler, he announced his Schretterman said he was taking a sabbatical to reflect on things that matter. Wolfe just snorted and said the man had finally found the limits of his cowardice. Cordelia didn't take over the firm. She declined the offer. Instead, she set up something else, an independent tithing body to investigate fiduciary abuse in boutique investment groups. Her first client, the same board that tried to ignore her. She was going to be just fine. Wolfe called it penance. I called it strategy. That evening, after a lazy meal of Cornish hen with pearl onions and a sauce so rich it might have filed taxes, Wolfe summoned me to the office. He was reclining in his chair like a Roman senator awaiting news of a conquered province. "I suppose you want a postmortem," he said. "I like to think of it as dessert," I replied, settling into my usual seat. He sipped his beer, an amber Belgian that Saul had delivered Astanks, and exhaled like a man finished with obligation. "The crime was not criminal in the legal sense," he said, "but it was moral sabotage, the distortion of truth for personal control that is no less dangerous than murder." I nodded. Cordelia went far, not far enough to break anything but close. Yes, Wolfe agreed, and that is the peril of grief, channeled through intelligence. It doesn't unravel, it weaves. "She's not the first." I said no, he murmured, much as one of the more inventive. We sat in silence, a while the way men do when big questions have been answered and only the small honest ones remain. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes, then opened them again, almost reluctantly. "I dislike being manipulated," he said, "but I dislike waste more. Miss Feldman wasted nothing, not even guilt." He lifted the pepper grinder from his desk, the Samione that had started it all clean, now empty. "Would you like it?" he asked. I blinked. "The grinder. It is no longer welcome here," he said, "and Fritz refuses to touch it. He calls it an object of insinuation." I chuckled. "Sure, I'll take it. I could use a reminder not to trust condiments." I tucked the grinder under my arm and stood. Wolfe hadn't moved. What was it really about in the end? I asked. "The money, the control." "No," he said. "It was about legacy." He opened his eyes and fixed them on mine. Elias Feldman feared, being Jarist, that his death would mean nothing, that the people he built would turn him into a line item, so he tried to leave a trace, not just proof of what they did, but proof that he knew that he still mattered. Did he? Yes. Wolfe said, because we read the ledger, and now they know he wrote it. Later that night, I sat in my room, the grinder on my desk, spinning slowly under one finger. It was smooth, well made, deceptively heavy. It had hidden a secret, revealed a conspiracy, and shaken up the most immovable man. I knew. I picked it up, turned it once, and said it aloud. Who knew Peppa could be so dramatic? Then I thought about Cordelia standing in this very office. Eyes sharp, voice low, trying to orchestrate justice with borrowed tools and disguised guilt. She hadn't failed, but she hadn't won clean either. And that's the thing about playing Nero Wolfe. You can try, you can even get close, but in the end you'll always be just another suspect sitting in that room, waiting for him to explain who you really are. Weak past Thessaly, didn't notice no headlines. Screamed justice, no arrests were made, no glamorous downfall, or televised disgrace. That's how most real damage is dealt, not with a bang, but with a quiet ledger, a shattered reputation, and a cold phone call from an internal audit team. For Wolfe, the quiet was restoration. Febron stone had healed the kitchen, was reset the spice rack, sanctified Thekayan. Tin was thrown out entirely. Fritz had dropped it in the garbage like it was a venomous snake. But the ledger remained not in our files but in Wolfe's head and in mine. When Elias Feldman left behind wasn't just a list of suspicions, it was a moral. Sketch a portrait of rot beneath polish of old men, trying to engineer legacy while slowly becoming footnotes in their own firm. It got me thinking about what people leave behind when they know their time short. Wolfe didn't. He never spoke of legacy. And Eck knew better than to ask. But I wondered sometimes if that was his way of resisting time by refusing to acknowledge it. That morning, I found him in the plant room, not pruning, but simply sitting watching the orchids breathe. His face was still, but not sleepy. He was thinking, not solving, just thinking. I said, for a guy who claims to deed a sentiment, you sure looked like you felt something after Cordelia walked out. He didn't answer at first. Then I didn't detest sentiment. I detest sentiment mistaken for justice. I folded me arms. You don't think she deserved to get? Even no, he said, she deserved to understand. Not to win. That is the difference between truth and vengeance, between grief and cruelty. He stood slowly, one of those rare tectonic movements that Wolfe reserves for either fire or reflection. She is intelligent, Hesed, but intelligence without control is flammable. Elias knew this. That's why whoever told her what he'd found, he feared she'd ignite it before it could be used properly. She did almost frame someone, yes, and almost a suicide. But she stopped, and that matters. Wolfe looked at me, his expression unreal. It matters more than we want to admit, to catch ourselves in the act of becoming the thing we hate. That is conscience. That is the start of wisdom. That afternoon, Saul dropped by and never stays long, unless something's burning. I had a call, he said, from Simeon in Macius, a contact in corporate law. Wolfe looked up. Yes, the Roy Reveling the Shell. Vivin helped structure anonymous filings, falsified audits. Money will change hands. Soon will she be charged? Probably not. Should disappear, relocate, find another house off Mirrors. Wolfe sipped his beer. Then we've done what we could. Saul glanced toward the office hallway. What about Cordelia? She's busy, I said. Started some kind of ethics foundation. She has her father's fire. Saul said no. Wolfe said she has his fear. That landed heavier than expected. Wolfe turned to Saul and Mr. Tupper, trying to pivot. He's rebranding as a thought leader. Wolfe winced. Ghastly phrase in Belden. His license was suspended temporarily, but he's already looking at crypto advisory work. I laughed. That's like grounding a pickpocket and handing him a webcam. Saul smiled, shook his head, and left that night. I asked Wolfe the real question. Do you ever worry we're just putting new locks on old doors? He tilted his head. Explain. We solve these cases. We catch the liars, the schemers. But someone always takes their place, even it's replaced by another. Vivian, another firm, another fall. Doesn't it feel like we're mopping a floor? Well, Levy, faucet still on. Wolfe was silent. Then he said, yes, and that surprised him. But he continued, we don't mop for the faucet, we mop forth ones who live on the floor. I blinked. That's oddly poetic. Don't buy impertinent. The next morning, brought a letter, handwritten, no return address, but postmarked in Manhattan. I brought it to Wolfe after breakfast. He opened it with his silver letter knife and read in silence. Then he passed it to me. It was from Cordelia. Mr. Wolfe, I wanted to say thank you, but thank you is too small a word for what you did. You didn't just uncover facts. You stopped me from becoming someone I wouldn't recognize. I have a new office, no assistants. Just files and long hours I've started. Reading your old cases, you've left a trail not of brilliance, but of restraint that's harder and more admirable. My father never said it, but I believe he knew you'd understand him, even when no one else did. I hope I earned a sliver off that understanding. Cordelia, I set the letter down. She's not wrong. I said she's not right, either. Wolfe replied, but he kept the letter. Folded it slowly, neat, libeled it in the drawer beside the one where he kept Montenegrin postage stamps and receipts for down per in that evening. Fritz served braised rabbit over couscous, and Wolfe lingered over dinner. For once he didn't talk about the cassie. He didn't talk at all, just chewed, nodded occasionally, and reached for the pepper. He stopped him. Not that one, I said, holding up a new transparent grinder he took. It turned it once, then muttered, no symbolism, I hope. None, I said, just pepper. Good, he said, grinding it with finality, because I'm sick of seasoning. The rain started around midnight, slow and surgical like the case itself. It tapped the windows of the brownstone without urgency, just a gentle reminder that the city, like the people in it, never really sleeps. Wolfe had returned to his chair, belly full of duck mind, full of victory, though he'd never call it that. He didn't gloat. He didn't even speak. He simply reached for a fresh bottle of beer and poured, with the elegance of a man who'd won the war without firing a shot. I was across from him, spinning a pen on McNuckle, thinking back through every step. Cordelia's arrival, the grinder, the subtle rearrangement of our kitchen, the ledger hidden inside, Kafka, the misdirection, the lies stacked like poker chips in a room, full of card sharps threatening to be clients. It had been a game of layers, of one move pretending to another, and Wolfe, true to form, had solved it not with speed, but with stillness. He'd let every suspect reveal themselves simply by how they reacted to the idea of guilt. He finally spoke. She'll not call again. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to know. I said, Cordelia knows better. She got what she wanted, just not in the shape she thought it had come. She got clarity. Wolfe said that is rarer than justice. I thought about that. You think she regrets it? No, he replied. She regrets getting caught doing it the wrong way. Do you? He gave me a look, eyebrow arched, expression unreadable. I regret that her father didn't trust her with the truth. Had he done so, perhaps this wouldn't have required my intervention. I nodded slowly. So, in the end, it wasn't really about the ledger. It never was. The Wolfe said. He leaned forward and tapped the grinder. The now empty, harmless relic of a war fought in whispers. It was about inheritance. Hesed, not of money or power, but of fear. Elias Feldman feared what would become of his empire. Cordelia feared being left with only questions. They both hid what mattered. And the others, Wolfe waved a hand. They will be replaced. Greed is renewable. That made me laugh, soft, honest. And us, what do we inherit? Hesmold faintly. Dinner? There was no great final twist. No arresting officer at the door. No grand unmasking in front of a roaring crowd. Just a notebook quietly delivered to the board. A foundation launched in Elias's name, a firm slowly folding under the weight of its own secrets. Justice, Wolfe always said, was its spectacle. It was structure, and it had been served. The rain was still falling when I stepped out onto the stoop. The next morning, the city smelled like wet cement and old plans. Somewhere out there, Simeon was already planting the seeds of the next disaster. But not in our kitchen, not tonight. Inside, Fritz was shopping fresh rosemary, humming something operatic. Wolfe was in the plant room, whispering to orchids as if they were jurors. And me, I was writing this down because someone should remember that a pepper grinder, her single misplaced spice jar, and one father skeet paranoia nearly appended a legacy, but it didn't, not on Wolfe's watch.